Okay. Well, hi,
All
Mark.
right. Well, hi, Rachel. Well, Rachel, something new for this episode is we have our first episode sponsor this time around. And before we get too far with this, I will just let Jeff introduce himself and the product that he's sponsoring.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Rachel. And really thank you to ACPE. So I'm the founder and CEO of Gaggle, and I'm excited that ACPE is hosting this podcast with two great superintendents that are focused on student safety and well-being. This is right up our alley, and you're covering exactly the product that Gaggle Safety Management is all about. And I believe it's time for every district to implement a safety monitoring solution, which is so much more than just a web filter. I started Gaggle 20 years ago. I was a young, naive kid, and no one would invest in me, but I was stubborn, so I bootstrapped Gaggle, and still today there's no outside investors. There's no private equity firm pulling our strings. I believe in the business philosophy called evergreen. So it's not about an exit as an entrepreneur, it's about the journey. It's about making a difference in the world, helping students and schools and my staff. And I'm planning for the next 10 and 20 years about how do we make a difference at Gaggle. And I often tell people my exit plan is a coffin. Gaggle started monitoring Google email and online documents 16 years ago. We take this very seriously. Our human safety team reviews every single alert before it's sent. And our goal is not to miss any student's cry for help. This is why we monitor both the device and the user account, so that even suicide notes that are written on a personal phone using the school-based account, they're not missed. We also do it fast. We've seen many cases where an alert just 5 minutes later would have resulted in tragedy. Student privacy and data security is also very important to us. And while we want parents involved, we know that about 20% of the alerts involve abuse taking place in the home. Most mental health issues start in the teenage years and can result in drug addiction and suicide in the student's 20s. At Gaggle, we often talk about lives saved, but I also talk about lifetime saved. When students are so miserable that they're cutting themselves or dealing with constant bullying, they're unlikely to reach their full potential and to mature into fully functioning and well-adjusted adults. I never want Gaggle to be the cheapest solution. Student lives and lifetimes are too important for me to compromise on. Of course, alerting about students is just the first step in getting students help. Many schools and parents don't have the resources to address the students' mental health issues. That's why we started offering teletherapy for students. We can pair a student with a licensed therapist in less than a week. And that therapy can take place when it's convenient for the student and the families, which is often in the afternoons, the evenings, or the weekends. Ensuring student safety to me is very hard work for both the companies and for the districts and schools. It needs to be done right. And again, I just want to thank ACPE for taking on this very important topic. So again, I'm proud to sponsor this. I'm proud to play a role in supporting students in schools and ACPE.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I've known Jeff for years and years, and I've known about the product that he represents. I think Rachel is a little shocked that we've been friends and that he still wants to hang around with me. But a wonderful product and a wonderful person who really does have a lot of passion for what he's representing. So that is 100% true. So thank you so much, Jeff, for sponsoring this episode. We really appreciate it.
Yes.
Thanks, Mark. You know, the most innovative people are a little bit crazy. That's why we like each other.
That must be. Rachel fits right in with us.
I was going to say, I didn't even have to come up with that line. So, Jeff, you fit right in. And what the work that you have been doing for what must be a large portion of your adult life is near and dear to my heart, and I think to every educator. So we are very grateful for partners in this space like Gaggle. And Jeff, I'm so glad that you were willing to take a chance on coming and being on our podcast, and actually as our first sponsor, knowing that you have known Mark for a very long time. We appreciate you, and I hope we see you at an ACPE in the near future.
Absolutely.
I would love to go again.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Hi, Mark Elliott.
Hey, Rachel. You look like you're in a different place tonight.
I'm in a different place. It is Beach Week.
Beach Week?
Beach
So you're
Week.
just somewhere close, like on the Oregon coast, or?
In South Carolina, near Charleston. It's so muggy here. It's 85, which at home would be like, oh, this is a nice cool day.
Well,
and here I'm melting.
Yeah, it's at least in Washington and in the Eatonville, Graham neck of the woods, it hit almost 90 today. Pretty hot for us. But I am sure that everybody who has been on the Discord and has been sharing their vacation pictures now is waiting to see yours. So you hopefully, if you haven't been, need to upload some of your South Carolina beach pictures to our Discord photography channel. I think that would be pretty awesome.
There's an embarrassing boogie board photo from yesterday that I may or may not decide to upload, and a beautiful sunset tonight. And I will say,
at least it's not going in the fails channel. So
it could go either way.
Yeah.
And the thing I do love about this house that we've been coming to for a very long time now, pelicans are the coolest birds in the whole entire universe. And there are hundreds of them that swoop through in formation and then dive gracefully and come up with their like gullets full of fish. They're so graceful. They are so graceful. They get a bad rap.
I don't know if you've seen the social media reels and things it's about capybaras, but pelicans love to try to eat capybaras. I don't know. It's just one of the weird things. But
tastes like chicken.
Yeah, probably. What I would like to say is it looks like some of our ACPE members' vacations are going amazing. Chris Bailey, I just saw that you went to Crater Lake and actually got through some of the smoke and saw the lake. I've only ever seen it from an airplane. And yeah, I have no idea exactly where Crater Lake is, but I'm assuming it's near Chris Robothm's place somewhere out there.
Chris Robotham, we apologize.
Oh,
again.
That's right.
We will give this up probably at like episode 12 or something like that.
Yeah, probably.
Yes.
Well, Rachel, I do want to jump hopefully right into tonight's topic. We have a couple of outstanding guests to join us. Tonight's topic is about student safety systems, mainly regarding the ones that kind of monitor student communications and the things that they do online for health and safety checks. It's also about student data privacy and the data that we use from those students to generate those warnings. And so I think we're up for a really fun conversation tonight because I think most of our members...
Back up on that word.
Okay. Conversation?
What kind of conversation?
Fun? Did I say fun?
Do you want to choose a different word?
Fun?
Student safety.
Am I missing something, Rachel?
I don't know. I guess I just think that like we're talking about listening and watching for harm, listening and watching for risk. And it feels heavy. It feels like it will be a deep and meaningful conversation. Fun.
You're always correcting me. Thank you.
It will be fun because of the people we have with us.
Absolutely.
And the spirit of this work. But I do feel like it's also a heavy topic right now. Yeah. And an uncertain one because of how we're in another one of those little wormholes where a lot of things are colliding together quickly. So,
well, let's bring them out.
Yes. And
would you like me to introduce our guest tonight? I'm happy to.
If you will do that honor, that would be lovely.
Perfect. Well, one is a pretty easy one because he's my boss. Dr. Patrick Murphy, Superintendent of the Olympia School District, is joining us tonight from an office that is directly above mine. I am like right below. And Dr. Susan Enfield, let me fix that. Dr. Susan Enfield, you're now with the UW, it's CEL, right? Is that the
Center for Educational Leadership?
Perfect. Formerly a superintendent of the Highline School District, former boss of one of our longtime board members, Mark Finstrom, for those of you who remember Mark, and recently superintendent in the Washoe School District, I believe. So thank you both for joining us tonight. And yeah, I'm not sure if you kind of heard the teaser that we were just talking about tonight's conversation around student data privacy and how we use that data for student safety systems. So,
Mark?
Yes, Rachel?
Is it okay if Dr. Enfield and Dr. Murphy, I think Susan and Patrick is what we talked about pre-gaming, right? So that our audience doesn't think we're being disrespectful as we move to first names. But would you each take a minute just to say hi and let us know a little bit about maybe your early intro to education? Or
Rachel slows me down all the time.
Yes. It'd be great for our folks who don't know you yet to have just a little sense of your background as we get started in this conversation this evening.
Go ahead, Susan.
Okay, Patrick, thank you. So Rachel, Mark, thanks for this invitation. I'm honored to be part of this conversation with Patrick, whom I've known and respected for many years. I am a former high school English, ELL, and journalism teacher. And I joke that, like many people who went into teaching, knew from a very early age I wanted to be a teacher. I thought I would always be a teacher. And somehow I lost my way and found myself in the superintendency because I think a lot of people dream of being a teacher. I'm not sure, Patrick, that people dream of being a superintendent, but some of us are fortunate to end up in that seat. I served as a superintendent for 13 years in the Seattle Public Schools, then in Highline Public Schools for a decade, and then most recently in the Washoe County School District in Reno, Nevada. And I'm currently the executive director for the Center for Educational Leadership at the University of Washington. And I will just say this, that what has guided me through my career as an educator and what became the heart of what many know as the Highline Promise that we developed in Highline is that we as educators have a responsibility to make a promise, and that implies action. That's not platitudes. That's not just words on paper. We need to make a promise to our families, our children, our communities, that every child who walks into our schools is known, and this is very relevant for tonight's conversation, is known by name, strength, and need, and graduates prepared for the future they choose. And so I'm grateful to be a part of this conversation tonight and eager to get going.
Well, thank you.
So Patrick Murphy, currently is superintendent in the Olympia School District. Prior to that, I was the assistant superintendent in Edmonds and executive director in the Issaquah School District. I was a middle school principal. I was just talking to my wife today. I remember when, at the time, Attorney General Christine Gregoire came to my middle school in Issaquah to talk about internet safety right before she became governor. My wife and I lived in Seattle, went to Seattle Public Schools when Susan was superintendent there, and our three daughters, had wonderful experiences in the Seattle Public Schools. And I'm very interested to dive into this conversation, and I was fascinated, Rachel, by the interaction between you and Mark right beforehand when he used the word fun. And you were like, I don't know, this is kind of heavy. And I think that gets at everything that I think about this topic as we get into it, that there's this sort of pushing of things that are making things really heavy and taking away from some of the fun. But we'll talk more about that, I'm sure.
We will.
Absolutely. So, Mark, these lines are starting to blend.
Absolutely. Rachel, you represent how many school districts at High Desert?
4 in our Central Oregon region. And then we provide information services and information systems and some security support for another 10 or 11, depending on how you count them, in Central and Eastern Oregon.
Perfect. And I can say that in the Olympia School District, we use a particular system that is not tonight's sponsor, but very similar to Gaggle. I'll just mention that we use Securely. We're going to get into a bunch of these names tonight. I'm sure we are. Which service are you using, Rachel?
I'm going to leave the name out tonight, but I'm going to talk about how I got there because I suspect we'll talk about them in another episode. But Mark, you and I had I think the first time that we really got to be at a conference that wasn't ACPE or some of the Pacific Northwest things, at an RTM event. And it was my first one. And I had gone down actually to talk about women in tech. But we were on the search for a new filter product in our region. And because this was 2021 or 2022, probably coming out of the pandemic, I went down with 3 questions that I was going to ask the vendors who I met with during that event. And I focused completely on filter vendors because our region's leadership, we were looking for something new. My first question was, do you have mental and behavioral health staff, like doctors, on your team? Number 2, tell me about your natural language processing and how you have integrated that into your product, because we understand now, as many of us support multiple languages in our districts, that words of harm, words of threat, emotional sentiments, you can't just do a translate tool. There is this natural language processing of understanding to accommodate for differences in language at the root of the language and at the phrasing. And then number 3, what is your process and your plan for, and Jeff mentioned this in the intro, for acknowledging that sometimes the threat is in the house. And at that time, we had products that the first thing they did was notify parents. And we were looking for some middle ground and a clear process on the school's role and then law enforcement's role. And there were a couple of those products that came to the top of the list really quickly because, yes, they have credentialed medical experts on their teams developing these student safety products. Yes, they understand the importance of machine learning and natural language processing. And as they have those mental and behavioral health specialists and professionals scoring the alerts and this like rapid view on these high level ones right away, if it's a code red one, it immediately goes to 911. It doesn't go to somebody waiting at the school, somebody, a parent in the house. It goes straight to 911 and emergency services take over from there. And so those, I was thinking as we were planning for this episode, I thought, I might start with that story and those 3 questions because it was such a defining moment just a few years ago that felt like several of the vendors looked at me like, let us go find answers for you. And now it's the thing that is the heartbeat of these conversations we're having.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great story. Susan, I know that you were also quite involved, I've heard that, with the use of Gaggle in Highline. Do you want to share a little bit of your story around that?
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, I think it's important to lead with the fact that every district context is unique and that a solution that works for one district may not be the best solution for another, and how each district partners with a provider or a solution will look differently as well. And ultimately, what drove our decision to go with Gaggle, and I really appreciate Rachel sort of naming those questions that she asked providers. And we were having some of those conversations. I'm not sure we articulated nearly as well as you just did, Rachel, in such a really focused, coherent way. But, we were starting these conversations back in like 2018. One of the big things for our district, Highline is a diverse school district of just under 20,000 students. Why is that important? When I talk about district context in choosing a provider, a partner, it was important that we worked with somebody who would truly understand our unique context and our values, and I'll get to that in a second. And how we implemented was directly tied, I think, to the size of our district. The way we approached implementation likely looked very different than it would in a district of 120,000, right? So I think that those kinds of differences are important for us to mention. But what drove us to have this conversation and ultimately partner with Gaggle was this notion that we've created a digital playground for our kids. And not every, I shouldn't say that, most districts have playground monitors out on their playgrounds, making sure that kids aren't shoving each other to the ground and, bumping into each other. And similarly, we've created a digital playground and equipped our students with the tools to access that in and outside of school. And I think that just as we have a responsibility to do everything within our power to ensure our students' physical safety when they're in our care at school, when we are equipping them with the tools to be in this digital playground, we have a responsibility there as well. And I want to be clear, my leadership team and I at the time had rigorous, robust, and sometimes heated conversation. And I would actually say debate over, I think, what many will talk about are the ethical questions that this raises. This sort of notion of a big brother feeling. Are we spying on our students? Is this right? Is this an infringement on their rights? And my response to that is there are so many risks facing our children and young people today that as a superintendent, we have a responsibility to do everything within our power to protect them. So much is outside of our power. There is so much we cannot do. But when there is something that we can do, I feel it's incumbent upon us to do that. Now, how each superintendent determines that course of action will be different, but For us, it really came down to being very, very specific in what we were trying to achieve, how we wanted to do it, and the safeguards that we wanted in place that would align with our values as an organization. And what I mean by that is our goal was, number one, to keep children safe. I didn't want to know if a kid swore. I didn't want to know if a kid did something wrong. This wasn't about finding kids to punish them. This was solely and completely about intervening if a child were in trouble or a danger to themselves or others in the school. And so that was what drove us. And then when I talk about sort of how we went about it, we wanted to be with a company, and which is why we came down to Gaggle, that would truly partner with us in this. And, I joke with a lot of the providers that we worked with over my tenure in Highline that I'm sure, like, to my face, they were all very lovely, and many of them are good friends now. I'm sure at the time they would roll their eyes when they saw a call or an email coming in from Highline. But, oh God, it's the Highline team again. They're going to ask us to do blah, blah, blah. Because we in Highline took our culture of care, our responsibility of care very seriously. And that meant that your off the shelf solution wasn't necessarily going to work for us as is. We were going to push you as we push ourselves to figure out a way to do it better, a way to keep growing, and a way to make sure that no child was falling through the cracks. And so what that meant for us was, as I said, Highline is a richly diverse, beautiful community. We have a large immigrant and refugee population. We have students and families who are undocumented. We have a large Somali and Ethiopian population, a significant African American population. And why I mention all of that is that the intersection of many of our families and students with law enforcement was a complicated one. And so we had to be very mindful of that. And we made the decision. And again, I want to be clear, we were a district of 18,000 students. It's different when you're at 180,000 students. But we made the decision that no calls would go to 911. We were going to make sure that it was a district security staff that went to a family's house if there were if the severity of the alert was such that it could not wait till the next morning or Monday or what have you. And that was a commitment that we made as a district. It put a significant level of responsibility and work on our staff, myself included. There were a couple times where I got the 2 a.m. phone call because of where I was on the phone tree. If they couldn't reach the first person, it went to the second, et cetera. But all of us had such a commitment to doing anything we could to make sure that our children were safe, that it was an investment in our time and energy that we felt was well worth it. And we have the examples of the fact that we did indeed intervene and save some children and young people. And that makes all of the effort and hard work and sacrifice worth it.
Yes.
It's quite a description and story. That was
Sorry.
awesome.
That was
no, it was great.
jargon
It was
for
great.
Mark.
And I was kind of watching Patrick's face because when you were saying, "Oh, we talked about this so much," and people were tired and rolling their eyes. I think Patrick did that to me. I don't know how many times I brought this up in cabinet, because if you don't, just pardon me, Patrick, but I'll just kind of give how this started for us. We were one of the early adopters of Securely because they gave us free cloud-based filtering for our Chromebooks. And free is a great price. Let's just be honest. It's a great price. And then they started moving into other aspects of student safety. And we said they're already in our district. Let's give it a shot. And part of that for us was that we got in at the ground floor. So we've had a lot of say in how this product has developed. We've had a great relationship with the company and our rep, who's been our rep for a very long time. But for us, and where I can pass this off to Patrick and he can relive the nightmares of me bringing this conversation to cabinet, I don't know how many times, we started to move into the student safety portion of it. And at least our evaluation was, we know you have real people on the other side. We know you have people checking these alerts. I want to see your actual rubric that you use to evaluate these things. I want to know what your mental health professionals are rating, how they're rating these students, and what then elevates it to a certain level. And from there, I will let Patrick take it away if he wants to talk.
Well, there's so many things to talk about related to this, but I want to start by affirming what Susan said, that the paramount duty of a public school system, of a school district, is to ensure our kids are safe. I don't care how great your test scores are. I don't care how great your co-curricular and your performing arts programs are. If something horrible happens to your child, all that stuff doesn't matter. So it is what parents expect more than anything, that their children are safe. So I accept that. And I really liked the way that Susan talked about, we've created this digital playground, right? That if you've got kids out on the playground, we expect them to be watched. If you got kids playing on the digital playground, you expect them to be watched. I'm a history guy. I taught social studies. And anytime we're going through something, I always back up in time. And I always say, what did they do in the little one-room schoolhouse out on the prairie?
Right.
What did Confucius do back in the day, or Socrates, when they were working with them? When they were passing notes and they looked at the note and they said, ooh, this is kind of concerning. I think we better go talk to his parents about this, right? I think we've always done that type of thing. The difference for me is out on the playground, I don't know what every kid's thinking. And I don't want to know what every kid's thinking for a lot of the reasons what Susan said. I don't, there's a lot of things I don't care about. It is that hopefully very, very rare situation where a kid might harm themselves or harm somebody else that we really want to know about. But I've always been concerned, because Mark will bring me things, and he's not the first CIO that's done this. I've worked in previous school districts where people have said, we can do a 3-mile ring around the school district and get all internet traffic and these buzzwords, if they come and they can do it. Or we can do everything on Google. We can do key stuff. We can do that. To me, it's too much. And I believe that it actually is taking the fun out of school. And I'm not saying that we can't keep kids safe, but we are so worried and so digitized about everything that we are creating very anxious children and very anxious families. And there's a big book written about it that's very popular right now called The Anxious Generation, that talks about kids don't play and they don't do risky play like they used to out on the playground, but we let them into this completely unfiltered, risky environment online. And that those two things are what's contributing to this. So I wonder about the upstream solutions. Now, I know tonight we're going to talk about filters and all that type of stuff, but why are we sending kids out playing on a completely unfiltered digital playground? That book says nobody should have a social media account until they're 16. No phones in schools. Let's get off the screens a little bit more, unless they're totally needed, which is a debate. Those are all the things that I think about. And then I also think about the capacity of our staff. So Mark will bring me something, and yeah, Susan got the call at 2 o'clock in the morning. I've gotten that call too. But at some point, our staff don't have the capacity to monitor every child's thoughts about what they're doing. And our idea where we say, I only want it to be something that's really, really serious, again, that's subjective, right? So then people are going to say, that sounded really serious to me. And then we get down in this rabbit hole. And our principals have so much coming at them right now because of these darn things. Every Monday is weekend internet clean up the trash day. I mean, that's what it's become in school districts. So, I have lots of thoughts about it. I always say this. Did you guys ever see the movie Bruce Almighty with Jim Carrey? There's
I told Rachel you're a movie person.
Morgan Freeman gives him the power of God. And in the movie, suddenly one day he made his car into a Ferrari and he did all this stuff that we would think we would do. That'd be really fun. But one night he starts hearing these voices. And there's somebody saying, I lost my car keys, or my mom's sick, or my dad just lost his job. And all this stuff is coming at him. And he gets overwhelmed because he's hearing all these prayers and pleas from people all around the world. Our brains aren't made to do that. And when we're just pulling all of this information that kids are putting, I don't think we have the capacity to do that very well. And we always end up doing it because we say, if it saves just one kid. And I could make an argument that, we should never put kids on a school bus. If it saves just one kid, let's make sure that we, put them in a bubble wrap thing and get them to school. Because I know it'll save just one kid. I think we use that too much to go overboard, and then we overwhelm the systems.
Yeah, now you see what I got to talk about in cabinet quite often. Yeah, it was really, the way we set ourselves up was a little bit different than Highline. And this is the first time I've heard that Highline was using in-house help in the after hours and, holiday times and things like that. We knew that our principals just were not capable of handling phone calls at all hours of the night, on the weekends. I made a call on Christmas Eve once because all of the alerts were coming through me. And this was before we got the human monitoring piece in place. And it was really ugly. It was a really hard call just to call a principal on Christmas Eve. So we went through quite a long process of developing a framework for our school district that involves lower level alerts saying, we just want you to check in with us to say you saw this within 1 business day.
Okay.
And the extreme stuff is, between hours, call the school. Outside of that, call the police. And I connected with the community liaison at the Olympia Police Department, and they were thrilled to have this as something that they got to participate in. I was a little worried that they were going to say, we can't take on another thing. And the person I was talking to said, can I tell more people about this? And I said, absolutely. They said, we're so excited to be part of this so we can help the children in our community too. So I think we eventually came up with a pretty good framework of how to try and not overwhelm everybody.
Mark, can I just interject?
Sure, absolutely.
I agree 100%. And I want to be clear, we did the same. So we were very, very clear. It was those, what in Gaggle world we call PSSs, potential student situations. Those were the ones where the imminent threat was such that it couldn't necessarily wait till the next morning. It couldn't wait till Monday. Those are single digit percentages.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be really, really clear. And
Mhm.
so even though it's a tremendous responsibility and weight that we ask our principals and others in the district to carry, we were very clear, like you, in developing a framework for which of those alerts went to them and when. And blessedly there weren't,
Right.
but you're right. The lower level ones you would have to deal with. I love Patrick's thing that you get in on Monday and it's like, oh my gosh, you've got to clean up from all of the stuff that's been going on online. But I'm glad that you mentioned, Mark, the creation of a framework, because Mark Finstrom, who was our wonderful chief technology officer, I think did something very, very similar in laying out, here's how this is going to go. Here's who's going to get what, when, because if you don't do that, the level of overwhelm is incapacitating.
And I know this, sorry, Rachel, I know you've been patiently waiting to say something, but I just want to say to that point, the two of Susan and Patrick, you're not familiar with our organization. I know for a fact we shared our frameworks, or we shared the basis of our frameworks with each other. We had these conversations with each other and we helped each other build them. We compared our own notes, and that's something that's really powerful about our organization, is that we do share like that.
Yes.
We're not afraid to ask a question. We're never embarrassed about it. So it was, working with Mark, working with a lot of people on this, you'll see probably a lot of similarities because we did.
Yes,
Sorry, Rachel.
Mark uses the positive word share. I like to steal like an artist in ACPE, right? Hey, does anybody have this draft?
Well, more or
this
less, we steal
policy?
from Rachel all the time.
I steal from others all the time. Susan, you dropped into the conversation earlier something that we've each touched on, and that is there's this idea of possible harm, or I think you said a PSS, a possible student situation. And then there's this imminent harm, what is believed to be or presents as flags as imminent harm. And then that 911 piece that you touched on in terms of the relationships of families and neighborhoods with the police. I think as these data sets grow larger and as the norming happens and they're able to realize that, no, we do believe this is immediate harm to self or harm to others. That balance between how do we save one child, Susan, as you started, how do we acknowledge the complicated relationships with emergency services and police in families and neighborhoods? And how do we then square that up with also maybe school personnel at 2 a.m. in the morning, not having the right equipment as human beings and in our skill and knowledge, as well as equipment like physical equipment with us to save that student. And so it's not a thing for us to answer this evening, but the way it's been touched on as we've moved around these squares this evening has really brought home to me just how complicated it is.
Well, and Rachel, I mentioned context. Remember that Patrick isn't that far out. Highline's even closer to Seattle. I say to people that politically, we need a different name for the color blue that Seattle is politically. Okay. It's not regular Democrat progressive blue. It's its own
Come to
color
Olympia.
blue. Okay. And I share that because remember, right when we began our partnership with Gaggle to do this work, it was about 2019. We started exploring in 18. We began partnering in 19. Well, the defund the police movement came up quite shortly, not long after that.
Mm-hmm.
So that complicated things even further, right? What was already, I think, conversations specifically in some of our communities of color around relationships with the police became heightened in the wake of George Floyd's murder and the defund the police movement, which of course the epicenter was here in Seattle. And so when I say context matters, that's why it really, really matters,
really
because
does.
there was no way that we could have this conversation around how are we going to do our best to protect our children and young people without acknowledging, and frankly more than acknowledging, but really figuring out how to respond responsibly to the context within which we were living. And that's why, I think these conversations are fraught under the most simple of context, which I don't know of any school district that is a simple context, but ours, I think, was really, really heightened. But can I just also say this too, that our children and young people, one of the things that has come out of the last several years is they understand the severity and the potential consequences of much of what happens online. And what I mean by that is, I'm I'm getting to be an older lady, right? I'm in my late 50s.
Me too.
And when I was in school, we talked about narcs. I'm not going to narc on my friends. I'm not going to tell the teacher, I'm gonna, and I'm not saying that doesn't exist today, this notion of I'm not going to tell on, I'm not going to rat someone out, but this notion of we can't play around anymore. Like there's now a level of potential consequences and severe consequences that I have a job to play. And I think I'm not sure we give our children and young people enough credit that they recognize that. And I think they own that responsibility. And, there was an incident several years ago where we had to, and we were very, very intentional and careful in when we made a decision to remove a child from campus, to expel them or out of school suspend them. But we had removed a student on a Friday from school. And over the weekend, this student on social media with friends was making threats about what they would do on Monday. Well, other students saw those. And now this doesn't involve Gaggle per se, but I think it speaks to the sort of this culture that I think we're creating of awareness and responsibility. Other students reached out to teachers over the weekend and said, hey, this is what we're reading and hearing, and we think, something might happen. And because of that, we were able to have extra security at the school that Monday. And that student did show up armed. And so, I think, and so we were able to intervene before any, but I also don't want to portray our students as these passive, players needing to be protected by these omniscient adults who know better and have all these tools at our disposal. We also have a responsibility to train and educate our young people to be responsible human beings. And I think that's a big, big piece of this, and I think Jeff Patterson, I think any of the CEOs of these companies would say, as good as they are on their best day, they will never fully, replace this notion of creating a level of awareness, responsibility, and community, frankly, that we need to be creating within our school systems.
Absolutely. It's building a fabric.
There's a thought I had. I'm looking at the timer. We're 45 minutes into this, and nobody, I don't believe, has used the word COVID. So I'm going to start. Well, because it coincides with a lot of the historical things you were talking about. When COVID happened, there's an interesting thing. There's a couple of things when we shut down society that things were eradicated. One was the flu almost went away. Did you know that? Nobody had the flu because nobody was around one another. The flu almost went away. You know what else went down to almost nothing? CPS reports for abuse in the home.
Yep.
Went down to almost nothing. And we were all going, oh, that's so wonderful. COVID's had the effect of not, kids aren't getting abused at home anymore. No, they weren't in school. And we are mandatory reporters, and we were the ones that see that type of thing. So absolutely, again, 100%, our paramount duty is to make sure kids are safe. And we have a special job when it comes to that in a school system because we know our kids really well. And at the same time, when COVID hit and we went completely off campus, we gave everybody a computer. And if you didn't have one, we tried to get you one. And we were putting kindergartners on Chromebooks. Yep. And everybody was online. And then suddenly everybody was sharing everything with everybody. And that is contributing to this anxiousness and this fragility and this because we know everything about everybody all the time. And I agree, it's those, because I have had incidents exactly what Susan's describing. Kids show up and thank goodness we have that information. Thank goodness we were able to intervene before that happened. We've had very similar things. But I just, again, wonder about the upstream things that we can do while we can simultaneously monitor and support the digital playground because our parents expect it. But let's quit sending them out into the digital playground unsupervised in the first place without the skills, digital citizenship that Mark's been a really big part of, teaching kids how to be just like we do it in kindergarten, in a classroom. How do you get along with one another? I think that's a bunch of the stuff that we have to do. And because until we do that really, really well and time the readiness level of kids to go into that place, I think we're gonna consistently face this overwhelming feeling that it's too much and everybody's feeling really anxious.
Well said.
And I think it's worth mentioning that in the Olympia School District, Patrick was part of this. I was part of this. We've both been in the district for quite some time now. Our school board of directors, a number of years. How many years ago did we do the student outcomes, Patrick? Do you know offhand?
7 years ago.
Our outcome 3, and I have it pulled up here. Our outcome 3 for student learning outcomes is advocate for social, physical, and mental wellness of themselves and others and be hopeful about the future. That's one of our student outcomes. And this does play into that. We want the students to have that hope and to pursue that mental wellness, which is why we talk about screen time quite a bit in our digital citizenship lessons with students that our wonderful teacher librarians work with our students every year.
In there, Mark, you said advocate for the physical and mental wellness of themselves and others.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other part of this, is that kids will tell us, my friend's not doing well. This is what they're saying, and I'm really worried that they're going to harm themselves.
Mark, sorry, Patrick. I want to build on what Patrick said and what you said, Mark, if that's okay. I know you'd love to get a word in edgewise, Mark, but
No,
you chose
it's okay.
Patrick and me for this conversation, so you're out of luck. But
We knew what we were doing.
I do want to say too that one of my ahas that I was really surprised at when we entered into our partnership with Gaggle and doing this work was I went into it thinking it was about making sure that we had sort of a window into how our kids were doing and that we could intervene before some tragic event happened. But what it also became in some instances was another avenue for our young people to communicate with us.
I was just going to say that.
Kids are smart.
Yes.
Newsflash, everybody. Kids are smart. They pay attention. They know what's going on. And so we didn't hide at all, as I know you don't. Like, this is what we're doing, guys, and this is why we're doing it. And so we actually had students who knew that they were going to be monitored and were sharing things because for some, and Patrick, to get to your point about the impacts of the pandemic, one of the things we've learned through teletherapy is some young people much prefer doing therapy online versus face-to-face because it's safer. I'm not going to run into someone at the grocery store. It takes away whatever stigma should be there that shouldn't be there, or is there that shouldn't be there. But it became a way for students who, for whatever reason, didn't have an avenue or didn't feel they had an avenue to communicate what they were going through to an adult. And I do have to say, I almost got a little teary when Patrick brought up the level of CPS calls. We had the same thing. It was 0. And we knew that wasn't a good thing.
Yep.
And, I wrote a book with my colleague, Christy Wilson, about superintendents during the pandemic. And one of the superintendents that we profiled talked about the day that, I am going to cry, the day that they brought kids back physically into schools. And she tells the story of this 3rd grader who just ran up to the first adult she saw and said, "I'm so glad to see you. Can you please help me?" And then proceeded to just share the hell that she'd been living in for the last however many months.
Yeah.
And as Patrick said, when our children are coming to us physically in school, we have a greater chance of intervening in those situations. Being remote made that much harder.
Yep.
And so I guess the moral of this, the point that I'm trying to make in a completely roundabout way is this isn't about a single solution to a single problem. This is a multifaceted challenge that we are facing. And what we have to do is find a way to, in person and through technology, find better ways to connect. And as the adults collectively wrap our arms around our children and our young people so that they are learning the skills that Patrick so well referenced around, self-regulation and communication and And as Mark said, self-advocacy and advocating for others. And I think, to Patrick's point, the pandemic brought that starkly into view.
So telehealth coming on the scene, it has opened doorways to counseling support in a way. So as the pandemic taketh away, it also gave us lots of good things. And I would put telehealth in there. And I'm curious, when in the intro, Mark, Jeff said that there's actually a mental telehealth component that Gaggle is introducing. And so this is going to touch on my next little wrinkle as we talk not about the tech of filtering, but some of these lines that we're going to start smacking into, Patrick. And it's whether we're talking about communities of color and police or this next one. And that is that just in today's Oregonian, Beaverton School District has a parent who has filed for a restraining order on the digital hall pass technology that Beaverton School District has been very carefully and thoughtfully rolling out for, I think, over a year now. Mm-hmm. And the note that I tagged in the article here, and I'm just kind of scrolling back up to find it, is at the hearing, the parent of a daughter argued, I get texts if my kid's late to school or is tardy to class. And this is in quotes, it's his words. But if my kid misses math class every day, 30 minutes a day, because she's using hall passes to keep taking mental breaks, I'm not made aware. So Meyer asked for a court-ordered pause in the use of Beaverton's digital hall passes. We'll have to have Steve Langford back on, Mark, through a temporary restraining order.
You are willing to take.
So this idea and kind of the entry that's fairly deep in the article where it gets to that, it does start talking about digital privacy, student health, and the argument from, I think, one of the attorneys is this is not simply a digitized system of a paper pass. It's a behavioral monitoring system that stores details of human movements and uses those to identify perceived psychological patterns. And I would argue, Patrick, back to your point on the data that the filters collect and aggregate, and that we are sitting on mountains of in K-12.
So
this
Rachel, so this is the father of a student or a parent of a student who was missing a lot of class using these digital passes and wasn't being notified about it. So they got a court-ordered injunction to stop the digital pass system?
I'm not certain that his student actually was missing class. I believe this is a parent who is starting to struggle with this idea of like, where is that line?
You're tracking my kid and all this stuff. I get it. Okay.
Yes. Okay. And so, and it is, many of the districts that are listening in probably still do have a notice on every district-owned computer.
Yeah.
As you're typing in your password to log into the network that says, reminder, this is a publicly owned device. Yep. In this school district, there is no expectation of privacy.
We can check your locker at any time.
We have Supreme Court precedents, right? Yep. What is allowed for us to check in terms of lockers and personal materials on students when they're in the buildings as well. I think a conversation about how we navigate this space as it really does become the heartbeat of some students in this generation. And we see a lot more than we would have before, which would have been which websites they were going to, not every word they were typing. So I'm curious about this.
So when, I think it was April of 2020, right? So March 13th is when school closed. I'm not trying to keep bringing this back to COVID, but I went on a radio show and somebody asked me and said, what do you think is going to happen? And I said, and it's just a guess. I said, well, I met with somebody recently and they told me that closing schools down was going to be the second hardest thing you ever do as a superintendent. And I said, what's going to be the hardest? And he said, bringing them back. Mm-hmm. And the reason why bringing them back was so hard was because we couldn't decide between teachers associations, principals, parents, medical people, and the school board what was safe enough. And we struggled with that massively about, does there need to be a vaccine first? Do we need to have temperature checks when they come in the door? Should we make sure the desks are 6 feet away? And we struggled through that forever. The crazy thing to me, Rachel, is I can drive across a state line and a guy drives by on a motorcycle and is not wearing a helmet. And I'm like, why is that? They don't require it in this state, but they require a seatbelt. Mm-hmm. So government is constantly trying to figure out how much can we curtail the freedoms of people to keep them safe. And it sounds like that this parent in Oregon is saying, that seems too much to me. that you're invading my kid's privacy, and I don't trust tech companies anyway, and they're going to release my kid's data out to the world, and somebody's going to use it, and they're going to try and sell them some pharmaceuticals. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
Now,
I will clarify, Patrick, this is a person who works in technology. And one of the comments in the article, right?
Isn't that interesting?
Yes, he's not opposed to digital innovations, but said he's concerned administrators use the digital hall passes to flag students for potential interventions without parents. And this goes back to the part that is complex to me, without parents ever being told this is happening. And so that space of the information that we have as schools that parents may not have access to, and that balance that we started with on where is that line, and do we acknowledge that it's in the same place in the digital space, but it feels different, or that it actually, there is a role that we start thinking about in the communication loop and the feedback loop with parents.
And Rachel, can I just say though, that the incredibly almost impossible situation that schools and school districts are in, let's play this scenario out. So the goal of any of this is to find the outliers, right? So we're focusing on the impact of what's going to happen to the vast majority of kids who are doing nothing wrong, right? Mm-hmm. And is their privacy being compromised, and are they getting caught up in this net that is really aimed at outliers, right? The folks that are really going to do something wrong. So this digital hall pass, the goal is to say, if a kid is like going somewhere in the school outside of class every day 5 times, what's really going on there? Well, God forbid that kid is up to something, and God forbid a tragedy happens at the school. Who's responsible?
And at the same time, 30 years ago, if a kid was going to the bathroom for 30 minutes at a time consistently, guess what that teacher probably did?
Right.
Hey, everything okay with Johnny or Susie? Oh, I just wanted to give you a call and tell you. I mean, this is just what we did.
Yeah. Yep.
And now it's all being digitally categorized and kept, and it's
so, yeah. In the article, right before the part that Rachel mentioned, about getting texts, it says, quote, once a system is used to initiate health-based responses or label students for further intervention, it exceeds the bounds of administrative record keeping and enters a domain requiring notice, consent, and constitutional protections.
And Rachel, you mentioned that this person was in the tech sector. Mark and I have had this conversation before. This might be anecdotal, and I'm sure there's some data out there that can back it up. A lot of really higher up people in the tech sector, particularly in Palo Alto and in the Silicon Valley, send their kids to private schools with little to no technology.
Absolutely.
Why is that? To me, it's like tobacco company executives saying, I don't want you smoking.
Yes.
It's very similar to me.
But I do want to mention that we have talked about safety systems. We talked about interventions with students and the way that the data is used. And our audience, I haven't talked about how these systems work because our audience, the ACPE audience, knows because we have them in our schools. But if we have other people listening, basically our web filter is tracking where students are going in pages. People are looking at those pages that may get AI flagged for some reason and determining whether there's a threat there. Now, we're collecting a lot more data than just that. And that's where I would like this conversation to go next, is outside of student safety systems. Is there a limit to which we should be using all of the other data points that we have and own as a school district in other dashboarding systems?
What
like
about
my school data
feeds?
Solution? What's that?
Your camera feeds.
Well, there's that even too. I mean, we use the camera feeds for all sorts of, disciplinary things. Yep. But we're building early warning systems for students based on attendance, tardiness, grades, things that are looking for patterns.
Discipline.
Yeah. All of these things that can potentially correlate to something. That goes a lot way past I'm searching for, something along the lines of suicidal ideation, or I've gone to the suicide prevention hotline. We're aggregating that data. Most school districts are at this point in time, because we own it and we can, and it helps shape a picture of students of how to provide a tailored and individual education for those students. So while we say on one hand, is it too far because we're digging into what they're looking at? Is it too far? to use it for instructional decision making.
Why do you think that Facebook and Google are the most valuable companies in the world?
Yep.
They just gathered up all of that information. We're using it hopefully to target a learning plan to help that student navigate K-12 system and go out and do whatever it is we want them to do. But yeah, I understand why people are concerned about all that data being gathered, because unfortunately people break into systems and they hold school districts hostage, and some people are kind of loose with their ability to maintain it. We've seen that where there's been breaches from companies that said, we'll never let that data get out, and boom, it gets out. I get it. Again, I wish we could go upstream and do less of it.
Yeah.
Some instances.
Finding that space and hearing parents, and Patrick, to your point about the tech executives and this understanding that the anxious generation, the mountains of data, we should be getting closer together as people, right? But somehow it seems to also drive us further apart. The conversations in districts around cell phone bans, our governor in Oregon signed an executive order last week, and so there'll be work to do here. And in one of our earlier podcasts, Shelby Reynolds from North Shore School District and Derek Stewart from North Thurston School District did this really lovely conversation. They were both navigating through a year of conversations with parents about cell phones and shared where their districts landed. This idea of stuff to figure out. The digital hall passes are really meant to be like an efficiency and a little bit based on student safety, but also an efficiency for the teachers and the administrators who are, we're still writing out like paper hall passes and then trying to find the kid who had the plunger hall pass, right? Like 30 minutes later in class,
did my hall passes
I have to wonder though,
plungers?
and I was thinking about this in preparation for today, Rachel, as I'm listening to you. I believe that as human beings, granted, there are some people, and I won't name names, who I think thrive on chaos and living in just blowing things up to blow them up, and just watching what happens in the aftermath of whatever chaos they create. I do think, though, the vast majority of human beings, and I'll put myself in this camp, I think at some level we all crave certainty. We crave clarity. We crave knowing that it's this or it's that. And I think, the pandemic certainly threw that out the window. But I think that so much of what we're talking about right now in this world of rapid technological advancement with AI, with all of it, there is just so much unknown. Whether we like it or not, we're all swimming in a massive sea of ambiguity. And yet we are craving certainty. People want answers. Tell me that it's this or that.
Yep.
I can't do that. That is not the world that we're living in. And I'm not sure as human beings, we've evolved to live in the world that we are now in with any level of comfort or frankly as. And so I think we're all sort of flailing around trying to figure it out. And I think that's important, because I think that fundamentally, like as I was listening to you talk about the parent in Beaverton, like I really want to get to like what's really at the core of what he's trying to do. When someone raises a concern, a disagreement with me, a parent, a staff member, when I was superintendent, I really wanted to get at what's behind that, what's driving it, help me understand. And I just think there is at the root of all this, people are just overwhelmed and just wanting an answer. They just want to know that it's this or that.
Yep.
Yes.
And that's just not the world that we're in right now.
We're making it worse.
Yeah.
We're not providing that clarity and that this or that. We're making this. We're just putting way more things and making it harder and harder and harder. Yeah.
Well, Marc and Rachel, you're welcome for us rebranding your podcast as the Doomsday Podcast, because now we've brought everybody down.
But I think we can do things differently.
Yes.
And I do think this idea of the developmental readiness of children being on a screen and being on an unsafe digital playground. Let's be thoughtful before we put a kid there.
Yeah.
Also, I think that the antidote to a lot of that digitally induced anxiety is getting outside.
Amen.
And getting together with people in a non-digital space, as we're talking on this call now.
Digital space.
Which is because otherwise, if we didn't do it this way now, there's no way the four of us would have gotten together today. So there's some beauty in all of this too. But what we're doing, we're just throwing it all out, saying it's all equally okay, and it's not, and it's what we're really struggling with, as Susan was just saying a moment ago.
Yep.
It is really fascinating. We had some friends over this weekend to go out on the lake, and our friend Julia was here with her daughter. And I asked her daughter, who I think is 15, I said, "It's summer. What's your day look like?" And she said, "Well, if I'm at my mom's, I'll wake up around 11, between 11 and 1. And I said, "Awesome. That sounds so great. I wish I could do that again." And then she said, "And then I kind of hang out and I do some stuff. And then in the evenings, I hop on with my friends." So they play Fortnite, I think is what she said. And that's their social. Like, they're not together, but they're together, digitally through a video game where they're talking and spending time together. And those relationships are important too. It is that merging of a different way of interacting with your friends, where it used to be that we'd try to get everybody on a corded landline telephone, with the long cord that you could walk around your house on. And gosh, I'm trying to even remember when the first friend had the ability to do 3-way calling. So we actually had 3 of us on the phone at once, which was amazing. But, that's kind of the evolution here. But I do agree with you, Patrick. I mean, getting outside.
So I was talking, my wife was volunteering in a TK classroom, and she was talking to the teacher. And remember when kindergarten parents would show up, or in a preschool program, they would drop the kid off and the kid would cry like crazy and didn't want the mom to leave, or the dad, or whoever it was, or the parent to leave. And the teachers and the paraeducators would say, "Just go. They're going to be okay. The sooner you're out of sight, the quicker we'll be able to get them going and do it." Well, guess what this teacher said that's the number one thing that these kids are having a hard time detaching from when they're dropped off?
Devices.
Their tablet.
Yeah.
That they want that tablet. And they're going, "No, you need to go now. You need to go to It's like, no. And they're freaking out because they want that tablet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And these are preschoolers and kindergartners.
There's a lot in that sentence, Patrick.
Yeah.
Or that couple of sentences,
and Mark's
right?
point, though, around the 15-year-old, I think, Mark, what you're also pointing out, that none of this is an either or.
Mm-mm.
These are not simple, straightforward binary choices, right? So, there's value in getting our kids outside to go play with one another, and honoring the fact that part of how they also interact and are with each other is through Fortnite or whatever it is they're doing. That's not bad.
Yeah. It's not inherently bad.
It should be part of a larger whole, not the whole in and of itself. And I think that's the point Patrick has made throughout this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I've heard people say that kids these days, which are often talking about teenagers, they just don't communicate. And to Mark and Susan's point, they communicate in a way that you don't like, or that you're not used to, or it's foreign to you. But they do it. And like you're saying, is that their entire existence, or is it partially? And if it's not harming in any way, it's not causing isolation or anxiety, those types of things, then that's okay. Again, that book, The Anxious Generation, talks about gaming and talks about how there's good parts of gaming, and there's parts where it can become an addiction. And it's just, everything has context, as we've been saying all night as well.
Absolutely. I will represent the Gen Xers who were never going to go anywhere because we just watched MTV and played video games. And many of us also were athletes and worked hard at high school jobs. And those video game nights on Friday nights, sitting in beanbags around somebody's TV in the TV room with the game console, I tend to find, like, I'm a history major by schooling. And, this idea of the kids are all right. There are things to figure out, Patrick, and Jonathan Haidt in The Anxious Generation is certainly defining a moment that we are in now. And in general, though, to Susan's point, when we're looking for outliers, the kids are also all right? They're Fortniting together. They are playing. For anybody who's around, like, sports, music, dance, right? All of the activities, those kids that get to know each other so well in person through hours and hours of bus rides and practices, and the kids who are together in classrooms with teachers. There are these physical touch points that augment the digital as well, that sometimes go unnoticed when we have conversations like this.
Yeah, for sure. I saw a thing recently that said we're living at the safest time in human history, that you are less likely now to be killed or harmed at the hand of another than at any time proportionally in human history. It doesn't feel that way. because we hear so much information like, oh my gosh, did you hear what happened? Where was that? In Minnesota. I don't live in Minnesota. It's just, I'm constantly getting this information. And so it's making me feel anxious. The truth is, Rachel, what you're saying and what we've all said at different points during this call tonight is schools are joyous, wonderful, beautiful places. And kids are doing amazing, fun, learning activities every day with caring, nurturing adults. And they're just great places to be. And we don't talk about it enough because the negative overwhelms the massive positive that's happening. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we need to do a better job of getting that word out too, which I think we are, and technology can help.
Mark, there was a headline this week that teenagers want landlines back. Did you see that one?
I did not.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Well, I think it's just that they're like, we're done with the cell phones. We just want like a phone on the wall that's at home. They essentially want our 80s like cool generation back is what they want, I think, because we set the bar high.
I'll take that. Yes. I think we set the bar super high. I think we're the generation. I mean, are we all Xers here? I think we're all Gen Xers here, right?
Yeah, I think so, probably.
We have a very high opinion of ourselves and our generation.
We do. We do.
It is kind of funny. And so for you guys, we do a bit of pop culture usually in these episodes. We talk about movies and TV shows, which we haven't talked about yet. But I do constantly see on Instagram and Facebook, the Gen Xers saying, we were the last generation that our parents didn't know where we were. We were told to come home when the streetlights come on. We drank out of the garden hose. We rode our bikes and we did really dumb things, and it was totally normal. And we just don't see that anymore. And I think a lot of it gets back to, some of the earlier conversations where we were talking about watching the kids on the playground, watching them in the digital playground and those kinds of things. And that just certainly has changed quite a bit. But what I will mention is I have a bunch of millennial friends who have become the greatest self-regulators on screen time. It's shocking to me. They talk about it with each other. What's your screen time look like? What's your app say? And I am sitting there going, are you kidding? And with the Xers that I've talked to, they're like, yeah, we're totally addicted to our devices. We're on them all the time. Screen time apps, what? But I think there is an acknowledgement of screen time being harmful once you're past that point of being unable to self-regulate. Once your brain has developed to a point where you have the capacity to regulate yourself a little bit, you start to understand that having some limits on your own screen time is important. And I think that's fascinating because the millennials that I know never had anybody to teach them that. I mean, they were the first, right? Mm-hmm. We didn't grow up with cell phones. We didn't grow up with the internet like they did. So it's really, that has been just kind of a little social observation that I've made with some of my friends, that they talk about these things and discuss them. And these are people that I would never think that would do that.
That's hopeful.
It is.
That's good.
You mean, because those are things that are going to get passed down to their kids.
Yeah. I mean, my husband and I were joking about this at lunch over the weekend. I still remember a time that if you didn't go to the bank on Friday, you weren't going to have cash for the weekend. There were no ATM machines. I remember the time when if you weren't home in time for the show that you wanted to watch on your network television channel,
you missed it.
You weren't going to see. I mean, and that feels like just so long ago. And I think for today's they can't even conceive of a world where where everything isn't at your fingertips and and again, I just think it comes back to it's the duality of this world that we're living in. Everything has a pro and a con to it. It just does. And so how do we regulate ourselves? And in doing so, regulate the advances in technology in a way that makes it human and sane and not to continue to dehumanize, I think.
Let me know when you get that figured out, Susan. You smarticles at the University of Washington. Tell me how you guys are going to figure that out.
I'll get right back to you, Patrick.
Okay. So I was thinking about asking this question and then started wondering as Mark was talking about the millennials, I wonder what the promising practices and which districts are the bright spots on bringing those kind of parent listening sessions together that Shelby spoke to in North Shore and really figuring out the digital safety and how we involve the parents in listening sessions, right? Not necessarily in policy making, but really hearing and Is there another round of that coming, or is it already fairly settled?
I know in Olympia, it was sort of happening organically at sites. I mean, we have a history of site-based, really strong school-based decision-making in a lot of ways, and schools were just having individual parent groups and meetings and talking about their cell phone issues and looking at our district policy. And a lot of them did book reads with their parent groups and the staff, all reading The Anxious Generation and things like that. So I think it's ongoing, but I think that those listening sessions absolutely helped drive how we would implement and enforce our cell phone policy, which had been in effect since 2011. Everybody's like going, "Why are you banning cell phones?" And I'm like, "Really?" Because it was there since before I got here. But it talked about the local context. How are we going to do that here in this school?
Yeah.
And I thought those conversations went pretty well. And Mark, you probably were around some of those.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say
I do
too
think
that
sorry.
I love Patrick talking about what's happening sort of in those conversations at different sites and things. I think we also can't put the sole responsibility of navigating all this on our schools. And I think that we're asking a lot of our schools, of our teachers, of our leaders in our public school systems. This is not a school district responsibility alone. This is a societal responsibility. And I think that it's important. I mean, I guess my challenge to the parent in Beaverton is a lawsuit really the best way to get the outcome that you want? Is there a way to engage with the school district to say, I think we want the same thing, which is to make our schools safe places where kids and adults thrive? Explain why this is how we're going to get there. How does this, and so I guess I would challenge all of us in communities in which our school districts exist to be part of the conversation and the solution, not just to throw, blame and demands at our schools to figure all of this out. It's much bigger than our schools, much, much bigger. Schools are just a microcosm of what's going on in the communities that surround them.
Absolutely. And it brings us back a little bit to the safety element, right? So we've kind of wandered through a few topics, and that idea of keeping kids safe is, as we think about the hierarchy of needs, pretty near the top of it. And as these tools evolve, there's still a lot to figure out on where we find those lines between the ookie factor that have parents.
What was that? What was that word
coming
again?
to us? Ookie. It's a technical term.
Okay.
And Patrick, you touched on it gracefully, like when you do the site-based approach, building the micro communities that really allow us to build trust better as human beings than the super large communities. There are pathways there that allow for some what might be uncomfortable conversations or the uncomfortable questions that are asked because they feel safe enough in those communities to ask them.
It's that context Susan talked about. You got to know the context.
Context, yes. Mark,
Okay.
I feel like we've talked less on this episode than any other episode, and it's because of the quality of your friends that you brought on the call with us this evening.
That was the
and
plan.
the episode this evening.
I didn't want to talk much tonight. On behalf of Rachel and myself, thank you to Drs. Enfield and Murphy. Such a wonderful and important and serious conversation. Student data privacy and student safety is such an important topic. And on that note, thanks to Jeff Patterson from Gaggle for sponsoring our episode and providing such an important service. So once again, a big thank you to all who have participated tonight and listened. And now Rachel and I are going to unplug.
Yes. Susan, Patrick, thank you so much. Did you come up with a sign off for tonight?
I did my sign off. It was we're unplugging for tonight.
I missed that. Sorry.
I thought it was so clever. I was like, and we're unplugging for tonight. Because we're plugged in.
I know. That's lovely. And it flew under my radar. I'm sorry that I did not pick up what you were laying down.
That's okay. It's okay. How about I do it officially now? And we're unplugging for tonight.